Why does change feel easy for some people, while others try again and again and still end up in the same place? Maybe you have promised yourself that this time you would exercise regularly, only to stop after a few days. Maybe you plan to read more, wake up earlier, or learn a new skill, but your motivation slowly faded. Or maybe you are tired of setting big goals that feel exciting at first and disappointing later when they fall apart. If you have ever wondered why your willpower seems to disappear exactly when you need it most, you are not alone. And more importantly, it may not be your fault. We are often told that real change requires strong discipline, endless motivation, or dramatic effort. That if we fail, it means we simply did not want it badly enough. But what if that idea is incomplete, because meaningful change rarely begins with huge actions or sudden transformations? It does not start with completely redesigning your life overnight. It starts much smaller than that. This is the story of someone who spent years trying to improve himself and failing every time. Not because he lacked ambition, not because he was lazy, but because he was using a strategy that worked against him. What he eventually discovered was simple, realistic, and quietly powerful. And if you stay with me, it may change how you think about change itself. In a city where everyone seemed busy chasing progress, there lived a 31-year-old office worker named Michael. From the outside, Michael's life looked stable. He had a steady job, a comfortable apartment, and plans for the future. But inside he felt stuck. He had many goals and just as many unfinished attempts. His walls were covered with notes about the person he wanted to become. His shelves held books he fully intended to read someday. His phone was filled with reminders and apps designed to help him stay consistent. Every new year, Michael told himself the same thing. This time will be different. For a short while, it felt true. He followed his routine, woke up with purpose, and felt proud of himself. But slowly, the effort became heavier. One skipped day turned into several. The routine faded without a clear ending. Soon, Michael found himself back where he started. Not because he gave up completely, but because starting over had become familiar. Each morning, he woke up with a quiet sense of disappointment. Not dramatic, just persistent. A feeling that time was passing, and he was still waiting to become the person he planned to be. And without realizing it, that feeling began to shape how he saw himself. Over time, that quiet disappointment began to follow Michael everywhere. It showed up in small moments, when he passed a gym on his way home, when he saw someone reading during a lunch break, when a coworker casually asked how his goals were going. Michael would smile and give a short answer, but inside, he felt a familiar weight. The hardest part was not failing again. It was the growing belief that this was simply how things were for him. That change was something other people figured out, but not him. At night, Michael would lie awake, replaying the same thoughts. Why do I keep starting and stopping? Why does motivation always fade? Maybe I am just not consistent enough. Maybe I am missing something everyone else has. He tried to push those thoughts away by making new plans, smaller plans, better plans. But even those eventually faded, leaving him in the same place. What Michael did not realize was that the problem was not effort. It was not discipline. And it was not a lack of desire. The real problem was how much he was asking of himself at the very beginning. Every plan required a version of Michael who already had habits he was still trying to build. And without knowing it, he was setting himself up to fail before he even started. That realization stayed with Michael longer than he expected. For the first time, he stopped trying to fix himself and simply observed his patterns. Every time he decided to change, he asked for too much too soon. He expected his future self to be more disciplined, more motivated, more consistent than his present self. One morning, while sitting quietly before work, Michael noticed how heavy that expectation felt. It was not inspiring. It was exhausting. Later that day, during a casual conversation, someone mentioned a simple idea that caught his attention. Change works better when it starts small, so small that it feels almost unnecessary. That idea stayed with him. Instead of creating another detailed plan, Michael decided to test something different. He did not aim to improve his life. He aimed to make starting easier. He asked himself one honest question: what is the smallest action I could repeat every day without debate or pressure? Not the action that would impress others, not the action that promised fast results, just the one that felt possible on his hardest days. For the first time in a long while, Michael felt a sense of calm instead of urgency. He did not feel changed yet, but he felt ready to begin in a way that did not overwhelm him. And that small shift made all the difference. The next morning, Michael decided to act on that idea. He did not wake up earlier or redesign his routine. He did not set a new goal or promise himself anything big. He chose one small action that felt almost too simple to matter. After getting ready for the day, he paused for a moment and completed that single action. It took less than a minute. There was no excitement, no sense of achievement, but something important happened. He did not argue with himself. He did not delay. He simply did it. The following day, he did it again. And then again. There was no rule that required progress. No expectation to do more. The only requirement was that the action remained small and repeatable. After a few days, Michael noticed something unexpected. Starting no longer felt heavy. There was no mental resistance, no inner negotiation. The action began to fit naturally into his morning. That quiet consistency gave him a small sense of stability, not motivation, not confidence, just steadiness. If you are listening to this and a simple action comes to mind, one that feels easy rather than impressive, take a moment to notice it. You do not have to decide anything yet. Just let the idea sit with you as the story continues. As the days passed, that small action began to change how Michael experienced his mornings. Nothing dramatic happened. His schedule did not suddenly improve. His energy did not spike overnight. But one thing was different. He no longer felt the familiar resistance when starting his day. The action had become automatic. He did not think about it. He did not evaluate how he felt. It simply happened. That was when Michael noticed something subtle. After completing that small step, he felt slightly more open to doing the next thing. Not because he forced himself, but because momentum no longer felt intimidating. Some days he stopped there. Other days, he naturally did a little more. But even when he did not, he still felt calm. He had kept his word to himself. Over time, this consistency created a quiet shift in how he saw himself. He no longer identified as someone who always fell behind. He began to see himself as someone who followed through, even in small ways. Michael realized that progress did not come from pushing harder. It came from reducing friction. The habit was small, but the effect was steady. And for the first time in a long while, change no longer felt like a struggle. It felt manageable. As that sense of steadiness grew, Michael began to notice changes beyond his mornings. They appeared quietly, without planning. During breaks at work, he found himself standing up and moving instead of staying seated. In the evenings, he felt less drained and more present. Small choices began to feel easier, not because he was trying harder, but because resistance was no longer in control. What surprised him most was that he was not chasing improvement. He was simply repeating something manageable. Weeks passed, and the small habit became part of his identity. It was no longer something he was testing. It was something he did. Michael also noticed a shift in how he spoke to himself. The familiar criticism softened. Missing intensity no longer felt like failure. Showing up even briefly felt like progress. He realized that for years he had been measuring success by effort. Now he was measuring it by consistency. This change in perspective made room for patience. He stopped rushing the outcome and started trusting the process. Michael understood something important. When actions are small enough, they do not rely on motivation. They rely on structure. And that structure quietly supported him even on days when energy was low. Change was still happening, but it no longer demanded his constant attention. As the weeks turned into months, Michael noticed something even deeper changing. He was no longer thinking about habits as tasks. They had quietly become part of how he lived his day. There was no checklist, no pressure to improve. The actions simply fit into his routine. What surprised him most was how little effort it required to maintain them. On busy days, he still showed up in small ways. On calmer days, he sometimes did more. But the foundation, never disappeared. Michael realized that this was the difference he had been missing for years. He had always tried to build results first and habits second. Now habits came first and results followed naturally. He also noticed that his confidence felt different. It was not based on big achievements or visible success. It came from trust. Trust that he would do what he said he would do, even when no one else noticed. That trust made decisions easier. He no longer avoided starting. He no longer waited for the perfect moment. Michael understood that real change does not announce itself loudly. It grows quietly through repetition. And once that process begins, it does not require force. It only requires showing up in a way that feels possible again and again. Looking back, Michael began to understand why his earlier attempts had failed. He had always believed that change required intensity, big plans, strong emotions, a sudden burst of determination. When that energy faded, he assumed the change had failed. Now he could see it differently. The problem was never his effort. It was the scale of what he asked of himself. Every past plan demanded consistency before it was built. Every goal required motivation before it was reliable. This time was different. By starting small, Michael removed the pressure that once caused him to quit. There was no fear of falling behind because the expectation was realistic. Even on difficult days, the habit remained within reach. He noticed that his mind no longer argued with him. There was no internal debate. The action felt neutral, almost invisible. That neutrality mattered. It allowed repetition. And repetition allowed stability. Michael realized that progress does not come from doing more. It comes from making success unavoidable. Small actions repeated without drama slowly reshape behavior. And behavior repeated long enough reshapes identity. Change had not arrived through force. It arrived through simplicity. And for the first time, Michael trusted that this path could continue. By the time Michael noticed how much his life had changed, he realized something important. The change did not arrive all at once. There was no single breakthrough moment, no dramatic turning point. Instead, it unfolded quietly through small actions repeated day after day. Michael had not become someone with unlimited discipline or constant motivation. He had become someone who made change easier to begin. That was the real lesson. We are often taught that transformation requires pushing harder, aiming higher, and demanding more from ourselves. But Michael learned the opposite. Change becomes sustainable when it feels manageable, when it fits into real life, not an ideal version of it. Small actions work because they remove resistance. They do not rely on willpower. They do not require perfect timing. They simply ask us to show up in a way that feels possible. Over time, those small actions do more than improve habits. They change how we see ourselves. Each time we follow through, even briefly, we build trust with ourselves, and that trust becomes the foundation for lasting growth. So if there is one thing to take from this story, let it be this: you do not need to change your entire life tomorrow. You only need to choose one small action you can repeat today. Something simple, something realistic, something you cannot fail at. If one idea comes to mind as you listen, consider holding on to it. You may even want to share it below, not as a promise, but as a starting point. Because real change does not begin with pressure. It begins with consistency. And sometimes the smallest step is the one that changes everything.